Hi there, welcome to Going Scared. I'm Jessica Honegger, founder of the world-changing brand Noonday Collection, and I am so glad to have you here for today's conversation. Our Going Scared community gathers here every week for direct and honest conversations that help you live a life of courage by leaving comfort and going scared. Welcome back to the Know Thyself series. This series is your step-by-step guide to discover how to get to know yourself and in turn, know how to hold space better for others. Today, we are talking about one of the most well-known personality tests. What do you think it is? I am not talking about the Enneagram. That comes later. I'm talking about the Myers-Briggs. I feel like because of the Enneagram's rise in popularity, we've forgotten about this powerful tool. And I love that it's called MBTI for short, because there are actually 16 different combinations of types instead of 9. But I'm not going to tell you about it because we have an expert here today. Dr. Tanja Hinterstoisser. She is a counseling psychologist who has most recently focused her attention on helping others define their life and career choices through strength-based self-inquiry. She knows the Myers-Briggs inside and out, and she is our guide today. All right, Tanja, thanks so much for joining us for Going Scared.
I'm so excited to be part of this conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
So Tanja comes to us by way of Allison Cook, and I wanted Tanja to come on the show to talk all about the Myers-Briggs because I feel like, at least in my world, the Enneagram is just kind of upstaged the Myers-Briggs, and the Myers-Briggs has been very helpful for me. So we're going to get into that. But first, Tanja, I wanted to ask you, I know that you really do specialize and are passionate about helping people to define their life and career choices through strength-based self-inquiry and practices. And this series is all about self-inquiry. We're calling it self-awareness. And I'm curious what you've seen over the last 18 months where people have been forced and perhaps more willing to do self-inquiry. And what are some of those mindsets that you've, in a positive way, seen shift? Because I feel like we talk a lot about the negative and the fear and the stress, but I'd love to hear some of the shifts you've seen your clients willing to take during this time.
Yes, what a great question to get us started on this conversation. Um, you know, it's truly been an interesting time in which we have, I think, as a global population, we've been given the gift of spending more time with ourselves in closed quarters to really spend time contemplating and thinking about who we are and who we want to be and what it is that we want to do. In the last few months, I have seen in various different subpopulations of our society, people really rising up and wanting to challenge themselves to explore other opportunities than the basically given recipe that they have been instructed to follow. It's been quite interesting to just have people not necessarily question themselves and what they have done, but truly looking forward to a different future and looking ahead and trying to really envision something different for themselves.
Mm. I'm going to get personal. What has that been like for you?
Yeah, it's quite interesting because I currently work at a small private college in Burlington, Vermont, and I feel like I have a very meaningful job. I feel rewarded every day by what I do. And at the same time, I found myself asking the same questions and
Mm.
wondering whether I should be stepping into something different for myself. Should I have a remote job where I can live anywhere I want and then do something entrepreneurial or something in private practice or something kind of related to what I have studied all of my life? So I know that I have been vacillating and kind of drawing the pros and cons of my possibilities. That's for sure.
Mm. I lead a group of women among many other things, but we are entrepreneurs and we encourage women to gather in person and we create a marketplace for artisan made goods. And I actually just got off a call, a webinar with them, and I talked about how fear takes us to that place in our brain where it's hard for us to envision possibility and it's hard for us to come into self inquiry with a strengths based mindset. Often we focus on the negative, which, psychology has taught us that the negative often sticks to us like Velcro and the positive slides off of us like Teflon. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about what is a strength based informed self inquiry look like?
Yeah. This is how I would answer this question. So, you are right in that we have historically really been trained and pre programmed to the negative. Value the negative in the sense of knowing how to articulate what it is that we are not doing very well in order to define it so that we can restructure it and create something better out of that. And I would say that strength based approaches kind of eradicate that and lets us start from a very different vantage point
Mm,
in helping us really, from the get go, look at our own talents and gifts the way we perceive them to be and hone them and utilize them and train them so that we can get skilled in being able to use those talents and gifts more often than not. Ideally,
mm,
as much as possible.
wow.
But that's truly something that we have to retrain ourselves to focus on, to identify, and to get to know really well so that we can more comfortably use that on a day to day basis.
Mm, gosh. I'm just feeling convicted right now because of a conversation I had with one of my kids last night when I was challenging him to, "Hey, I know you're really smart in this area and it feels like you're not trying." And yet he told me all the other things he was doing really well at. But it seems like even at such a young age, we focus on, oh, well, if you have dyslexia, then we need to fix that, or if you have this issue as a child, we need to fix that instead of coming it from this strengths based perspective of like, what are these gifts and talents that you have to offer? So, how do you begin to, because you said retrain your mind to come from a strengths based perspective? What are some of those practices that we could begin to implement? And then we'll get into the Myers Briggs.
Sure. Yeah, I would say there are many different ways in which we can really start labeling, articulating, and really finding our strengths. There are techniques that you learn even as early as our childhood and teenage years by simply starting to journal, for example. I have found that journaling really starts creating this dialogue where we get to know ourselves and our inclinations in a better way, not necessarily from a strength-based perspective, but it really helps us identify what rings true for us. Who are we? What makes us happy? What makes us sad? Those kinds of things. But when I do exercises, particularly with teenagers and young adults, I often have them look at their library or their music videos or their shows that they like to watch or listen to, because I feel like a lot of what it is that they're selecting is truly a connecting point to their own true self.
Hmm.
And those are really little, kind of just fun things that particularly younger generations like to kind of address and talk about because it's so easy and so non-threatening to really talk about.
Mm,
But really, when it comes to maybe us adults, getting to know ourselves in terms of our strengths and attributes, we do the process of self inquiry. We start really trying to maybe take assessments like we're going to be talking about next, but also trying to do something similar. It's like really focusing on a day as to what was our proudest moment of our day.
mm,
What was a particular achievement that we succeeded in a day? We have them. We experience them, but we don't take enough time to really focus on them and bring them to the surface so that they become alive.
Mm.
And that's, I think, one of the things that I would encourage anyone, or I do encourage others to take some time to focus on.
Yeah, so much of becoming self aware is just taking the time to stop and notice and have that journey of self inquiry. And it can be so powerful and ultimately life changing in how we show up and impact other people if we just take that time to notice. Okay, I'm going to shift us to the Myers Briggs. So, the Myers Briggs, it is probably one of the most well known assessments. I am in the Enneagram world that is just, everyone's all about the Enneagram. I do find the Enneagram. Are you familiar with the Enneagram?
To some extent, again, you mentioned Alison Cook, a dear friend of mine, and we have a lot of conversations about various assessments. And yes, she is a big fan of the Enneagram. So I'm getting acquainted with it.
It's a bit new to be used as an actual assessment in the
Mhm.
psychological world. So that's probably why, whereas the Myers Briggs is a little bit more tested and tried. The Myers-Briggs I discovered in my very early 20s. My husband and I, well, we weren't married at the time. We were just, dating, and we were about to go overseas to do development work, and so this organization gave us all of these assessments, and it's funny because I came across mine recently, and I had just been telling someone that I was an ENT on the line of J and P. But when I came across this assessment I took when I was, 21, I was an ESTP. And an ESTP is called the entrepreneur. And if you look at my life, that's pretty much what I've done. And so I wanted to, let's just start by why don't you tell our audience what do all of these letters mean in the Myers Briggs?
Sure. So the Myers Briggs offers us the opportunity to really label ourselves based on probably 16 different personality types. And they each, as you just mentioned, have different letters. So there are four scales from introversion and extroversion. So they're depicted within a bar, so within a scale. So you lean either farther more into the extroversion or more into the introversion. And then that extroversion introversion preference is exhibited more into kind of what energizes you as a person, like what gets your battery recharged. The second scale really looks at how you process information. And the two letters that are designated in that space is either the S or the N. So you're either a sensing type or an intuitive type. The third scale is represented with the letters T or F, and this one gives us a sense as to how you make decisions. So the T type, which is the thinking type, is different from the feeling type, which is the F type. And then the last scale is the judging and perceiving scale, which is the J and the P. And this is how you really like how you deal with the external world. So this is how you really actually live and demonstrate your decision making. So those are the four different types of scales that are represented. And as you put those letters together, the Myers-Briggs has a nice little summary of the profile. And this really tells you much more about how you live, how you socialize, how you make decisions, and how you really exhibit yourself in the world.
I am curious, as I mentioned, as an, adult, I thought I had kind of selected different letters than what I did when
Mhm.
I was 21. And do we change as we grow older? What does that look like?
We can absolutely change as we grow older. Now, this is a bit of a controversial topic because the true scientists, the ones that really believe very firmly in the statistical representation of a person. Like you will show up a certain way every day of your life. Those do exist, right? They believe more that once you are typed in a certain way, that you will remain pretty steady for the rest of your lives. What I would recommend looking into is really seeing the world as a dynamic process. And many psychologists and researchers agree with this, and that there's certain parts of your life that do cause significant change. So we
Mm.
have life events, for example, and there were tons of studies coming out. The 9/11 terrorist attacks and the trauma that people experienced, and how that really caused people to completely change their approaches and the way of living. We obviously also have like drugs and alcohol or just some kind of substances that we take in that they can totally alter our personalities and life approach. And then there's aging components. There's certainly also training your mind to think differently and training your body to do things differently that can also cause us to change pretty significantly. So in general, I would say, I mean, people believe different things in that within that spectrum of how much you change over time, but we have a core self, but we can certainly change quite significantly over time.
I wanted to ask about the N and the S because part of me wanted to be an N, and I mean, I have a podcast, I've written a book, I count myself as an intuitive person, but I am very concrete, and I like to have a very direct and concrete impact on my world. I don't know, to me, maybe I'm more in the middle on those, but talk to us about that N and S spectrum.
Yes. And I'd be actually very curious to hear what makes you want to be more N, because I think a lot of people have that dilemma that they would really like to be different than what the result sometimes shows.
Well, I'm a creative. I mean,
Mm.
I consider myself to be creative. I see possibility. I can look at something and see the potential in something. I do enjoy some philosophical discussions. I read a lot. And so I think that's what I think of when you read about what an N is. But then when I look at my life and kind of my even how I experience or think about my physical environment, it is a lot more sensory. So I don't know. Those two really confuse me. So maybe you can clarify that for the audience.
Sure. I'll take a stab at it. So, as I mentioned previously, SNN really identifies how we process information. This is truly getting into our brains and trying to see how is it that we perceive and process the stimulus, our typically internal or external, but typically external stimulus, and what is it that our mind constructs to move us forward. So, in your case, for example, you say you are creative and you are intuitive. So, when you process information, you actually see the big picture. You actually do draw connections. You can really pinpoint at certain things, not from a very concrete perspective, but from an inferential perspective. Like you can move things from point A to point B to point C very quickly, and it ends up in who knows where. The S is the part of the brain that really wants to pull information down a bit more. It wants to make things a bit more tangible and more concrete. And again, there are people that are vastly different from each other on that scale. So people who are immensely concrete in their thinking and people that are immensely creative in their thinking. In your case, like you already are suspecting, it's quite likely that you're more in the middle. That means depending on the circumstance and on the situation, you may be more on the S, meaning on the sensing and the concrete and the realistic, drawing conclusions
I
kind of
relate to
way,
all of those words.
right? Or you may
Pragmatic.
pragmatic, well, there we
Yeah.
go. And then at times, different circumstances, and we could probably look into what those circumstances may be. You may be more in the inferential place where you really want to really just let your mind go wild and explore all
Yes.
possibilities that are out there. So if we were to take the assessment very specifically, and I'd like to see the actual kind of statistical results in that, you may be really at the cusp of both areas.
I feel that. And then on the T and the F, I actually scored, now this is when I was 21, the exact equal amount. Like I did just as much T as I did F. So I'm also in the middle there.
Correct. Not at all unusual. And I would say that's probably one of the elements that makes people a bit skeptical about the Myers-Briggs in particular. But any assessment where people are on the cusp, if they don't get a very clear result, it feels like the assessment may be wrong.
Ah.
When really what I would suggest, it just means that in your case, Jessica, it really depends on the circumstance and on the situation as to where you want to make decisions from an F perspective, from a feeling, or from a T, from a thinking.
Okay. And then J and P, this has been the most helpful for me because I'm a P. I do know I'm a P. Now, when I was raising little babies, I was highly scheduled with them. I had them on good sleeping schedules and all of that. So I think that time I thought I was a J, but I think it was just the chaos of being a young mom with crazy little kids. I just needed to have P time. And in order to have P time, you got to have your kids on a J schedule. You know what I'm saying? Um, but my husband is definitely a J all the way. I mean, we gotta be 15 minutes early to anything. I mean, 15 minutes early is actually 10 minutes late, right? Whereas I'm a time opportunist and, I way overestimate the amount I can get done in a certain amount of time. And then one of my kids is for sure a J, and I was able to identify that very early. And that is where this is where the Myers-Briggs really helped me because I knew that for this child, it was not helpful for me to be like, we're just going to go with the flow. I mean, I really had to say, here's what we are doing today. Here's what to expect, and still to this day, even though this kid's so much older, like that has not changed. So let's talk about the JP dynamic.
And JP dynamic. I love how you phrase that. So, yes, the JP dynamic, to use your words, is similar to the others. So, the J, as you mentioned, likes to follow rules and not in a pragmatic way like the S would be, but more into exhibiting schedules and timeliness and having really routines in place that can be followed. That person that has that preference for a J really finds comfort and joy having everything ordered in a way that can be followed step by step, and projects really have a beginning and an end, and you wrap things up. It brings them internal peace and joy to finish the day with everything wrapped up. The P person with a perceiving preference really likes things open ended. So they don't feel they have any pressure to wrap things up at the end of the day. They're quite comfortable having things open ended. If the laundry didn't get done, there is another day tomorrow where that can be taken care of. And, we have completed other things. We have multiple things, maybe even running at the same time. Not everything has to be completed and tidied and wrapped up to be okay. Ultimately, I think for that scale in particular, in terms of just how we live and exhibit ourselves on a day-to-day basis, it's truly about what brings them the most peace and peace of mind. Some people like things wrapped up. Some people like things open-ended because they're proud that they're able to multitask.
Sometimes it stresses me out to even have things wrapped up because I'm like, I like to keep my options open. We'll get it all figured out. That in particular, as a leader, I think is probably what can cause the biggest disconnect because I think I have mainly J's that work for me. Well,
Mm.
because my project managers, come on, project managers got to be, even if they are a P on this assessment, they got to show some J's, timelines and all of that stuff. And I think that's where I can really cause the most friction as a leader and have to kind of be in tune to that part of myself. Okay,
Ah.
I
Can I
I am
say something
yes,
to
yes,
that,
please
Jessica?
do. Please do. Sure.
Because I think you're mentioning something quite important as a business owner and an entrepreneur, for you to really know so well what it is that you have, even if you're at the cusp of things, but you know kind of your own style. It sounds to me that you have surrounded yourself and hired people to really help your business move forward. So knowing that you are a P, you know that your project manager most likely has to have a J preference, and that your personal assistant perhaps has to have a J preference, so that they can tidy up the loose ends that you weren't able to complete, or maybe choosing not to complete, but so that the organization can move forward, because we really need both. So ultimately, we really need all 16 different personality types in the world in order for the world to function as it should.
That's so true. There's not, and that's what these assessments are all about.
Yeah.
Going back to the strengths-based inquiry, it's not that one is better than the other, although the I and the S is still, I don't know why. I just think, well, being an I is just, you're more interesting, and then being an S, I don't know. I don't know. I've got some hangups on that one.
Mhm.
But okay, so then let's end with the I and the E. I feel like
Mm.
this also is one that, when I'm having pre-COVID, I maybe even would have said I'm an introvert, but I think that's because I was just getting so much extroversion in. I was traveling so much, speaking at conferences, whatever. And then the pandemic hit, and then I'm stuck in my house, and I'm like, oh no, I'm an extrovert. This is not working for me. And then I'm seeing my husband who's like, I'm alive. I am now fully alive. He's such an, I mean, we seriously are like almost complete opposites on the
Opposites, yeah, it sounds like
Myers-Briggs. Yeah.
it.
But I do think that this one in particular, the IE, has been maybe what people have become even more aware of during the pandemic, especially during social isolation. Tell me what you've seen there.
Yeah, it's definitely a good starter to the conversation as to how things are going for you, right? And you hear a lot of people respond and say, well, the extrovert in me is just going stir crazy. And the introverts are saying, I'm having the time of my life. I don't have to go anywhere. I can stay in my pajamas. So it's
Right.
quite easy for people to really attach to those two constructs in particular. And I think the popularity of the Myers-Briggs personality type, the instrument itself, has become part of that kind of intrigue about extroversion and introversion.
Uh-huh. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. It's an interesting set of dual construct, because think about what purpose they fulfill. They really try to label what gives us energy, what gets us psyched about the day and excited about starting the day. The extroverts are really looking forward to the engagements with the outer world. Like, how many people will I meet? How many meetings am I going to have? When am I going to get to socialize with my friends? Like, they truly try to see all the ways in which they can interact with others and be with others during the day. That gets them excited. If they knew that with COVID now, they had to stay at home, it truly, like, I'm sure even as an introvert, you have felt the claustrophobia of being inside and not feeling like you are allowed to go outside and meet with anyone. That's pretty anxiety producing. That really just makes you want to crawl out of your skin and be like, I need to see my friends. I need to see my family. It's really anxiety provoking. Now, for the introverts, it's the other way around. And both have so much value if we learn to value it. So that's where it comes back to the strengths, and to also, you mentioned being married to an opposite, to really having you value and appreciate each other's preferences. and giving everyone the space to be that.
Well, and to speak for the introverts, because I have two clear introverts in my family, they love people. It's just small. They just want a few deep relationships. That's all that they need. It's not
Correct.
that they just want to be alone all the time. I mean, they do need more time alone, but they're not hermits. I feel like introverts kind of get a bad rap, and it's probably because our world is kind of set up. I mean, going back to school age again, I mean, we're set up to go to a classroom and be around a bunch of people. I mean, the world is set up to be around a bunch of people, but introverts, they can hang with people. It's just a smaller amount.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think society-wise, I think especially in the United States, I would say it's such an like gregarious, extroverted place, right? With the concert halls, with the football games, with like being out in the community, the university community, everything is really geared towards people valuing extroverts. And you're right, with introverts really enjoy one-on-one time, and they typically do have few but very cherished and perhaps even long-standing friends going back into early childhood. Again, we are generalizing, right? We're really just drawing the paradigms for those with the most pronounced types. But introverts really need to know that and need to be known as introverts and need to be told that it is okay to not want to go party, to not need to be out in the world all the time. And I feel like COVID gave them the opportunity to really just kind of relax and be fully, like, seize the opportunities of being their full introverted selves.
And this is where this is such a good tool because, again, with one of my kids who is in school all week, that is a highly extroverted activity. And so on the weekends, this child needs that fill time to be alone. Whereas my high school experience was all about friends, friends, friends. And it's easy to put my story onto this kid and be like, well, what's wrong? Instead of say, like, oh my gosh, this kid just needs to unplug. And that is how they were created. And I need to honor that. And that's what's so powerful about these assessments. It's not just about self inquiry, but it really is self inquiry in order to be a better human, a better partner, a better parent, a better friend, a better leader. And that's what's so powerful. Thank you so much for joining us today to share everything about the Myers-Briggs.
You are more than welcome. It was fun talking about it.
All right, now you got to go take the test if you haven't already. You can go find the Myers-Briggs test just by Googling it. You'll find it on several different websites. And I want to know, what combination do you identify with? Hop on over to Instagram. Let me know. I vacillate between ENTFP and ESTP. Anybody else out there? If you are, I want to find you. Come find me, Jessica Honegger, over on Instagram. That is 2 G's and 1 N. Today's music is by Ellie Holcomb, and I'm Jessica Honegger. Until next time, let's take each other by the hand and keep going scared.